5 or more facts about deaf culture from John Eichel. Deaf people can be very direct and similar to the value placed on the information sharing. Deaf people can be very direct with comments and questions about the topics that hearing people often consider rude. Deaf people are better drivers than hearing people, according to statistics compiled by the National Association by the Deaf and the U.S. government. Deaf drivers tend to drive better than hearing people. Driving is primarily a visual activity, and the ideal driving environment is different. Deaf people cannot talk on the cell phone while driving. When deaf people are signing, they don't look at the hands, they look at the person's face. People who are learning sign often fixate on the signer's hands, which looks unnatural and can be very effective on communication. This is because facial expressions are just as important in sign. Emotionless facial expressions of people who are learning sign can be a source of some amusement in the deaf community. Getting someone's attention is a little different from a hearing person. Deaf people bang and tap on things to send vibrations to get people's attention. It is very rude to wave your hands in front in front of a deaf person to get their attention. More than 70% of hearing parents who have deaf children do not use sign language with their children. This can result in a lowered self-esteem and delays in the learning isolation, since the deaf children are unable to communicate and express themselves to the people who matter to them most, their parents.
I'm Nick, and a big controversy in the deaf community is the cochlear implant. Most of the deaf community disagrees with the implant. The deaf community is like a culture, so getting the implant is like taking someone out of their culture. The second controversy in the deaf community is the big D and little d. The little d is a deaf person who does not associate with other members of the deaf community. They strive to identify themselves with hearing people and regard their loss solely in medical terms. The big D is a deaf person that identifies themselves as culturally deaf and have a strong deaf identity. The third controversy in the deaf community. The fourth controversy is if a deaf person is getting an interpreter, they should have to show proof of where they went to school and things that they have done for a deaf person. In the past, any deaf person should have the best interpreter when needed with the right qualification.
4 locations where they have deaf services and what they offer. 1 location deaf services come in is in the hospital. Medical interpreting, and any deaf person should have an interpreter during a doctor's appointment, so the patient can communicate with the physician. Located in San Francisco, California. California School of the Deaf is located in Riverside, California, and gives deaf children opportunities to excel in their learning and able to learn at the pace that they learn at. Wildwood Calvary Chapel in Yucaipa, California offers deaf service every Sunday, translated so they're able to understand church service if they would like to. Orange County Deaf Equal Access Formation provides quality of life and ensure communication access for the deaf and hard of hearing and deaf-blind
ASL
community.
facts. ASL employs signs made with hands and other movement, including facial expressions. It is the first language of many deaf North Americans. ASL is the easiest option for deaf people to communicate. ASL is said to be the 4th most commonly used language in the United States. No one form of the sign language is universal. For example, British Sign Language and American Sign Language.
Are we talking about deaf hardships? And the first deaf hardship is hearing culture treats deaf as handicapped, but the whole deaf culture, they don't like to be treated as handicapped. They are equal to as hearing people. They just cannot hear. The second deaf hardship is deaf children growing up. It's very hard to them to communicate with the parents. Like, even when a baby wants their bottle or a baby wants their pacifier, they can't like ask for it when they're like, because they're deaf. The next one is hearing culture think that they are more intelligent than deaf people. Deaf culture, they are equal to the hearing culture. They just cannot hear. Another deaf hardship is deaf people have very hard life communicating with just regular hearing people, like just throughout the world. Hardly any hearing people can sign and communicate with deaf people, and if they cannot, it's very hard for them to communicate with other deaf people. And the last one is deaf people cannot hear music, but they can feel the vibration sound. So if the new Kendrick album comes out, you can't hear that. any song, like they can't really hear the lyrics or like hear what they're saying. They could just feel the vibrations. And that's all deaf hardship.
PSE facts. Pigeon Sign English PSE is a combination of American Sign Language ASL and English. In PSE, you use most signs for English. PSE is not signed exact English. People may only sign most of the English words in a sentence and use English syntax. PSE is most frequently used by people whose primary language is spoken English. SEE facts. SEE is a visual representation of English. SEE is rarely used by deaf people. The developers of SEE base their signing on ASL. There are several features used in the ASL that are used in SEE. SEE means you have to sign exact English.
It's Nick, and here's 5 myths about deafness. The first one is that all deaf people could read lips as long as they can see your lips. The second one is that deafness is genetic and all people who are deaf will pass deafness on to their children. The third one is that deaf people cannot drive a car. Another myth about deaf people is that they don't have the ability to talk. Deaf people can be defined as hearing impaired.